Housing hell, how we got here and how we're gonna get out. I'm gonna be taking this week's reaction video to react to the conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's video that he put out about how badly the housing market is and how they're gonna get out. I'll give you my thoughts on this from boots on the ground and understanding how some of this all works. So make sure you stay tuned to the end. Now, if you are looking for some help on how to navigate this real estate market, you can book a call with me using the link right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Simply click on the date and a time that works best for you. And then when you see the prompt, fill in your name, email, mobile phone number, and the question you have for me, and then we'll chat then. Good day, Toronto. Welcome to another episode of Prime Properties TV. My name is Zhen, and I run and operate a RE/MAX in the Greater Toronto Area, on top of making awesome educational real estate content just like this one for you. And we're going to be trying something new today, so make sure you smash the like button and subscribe. I'm going to be reviewing the conservative leader's latest video about how bad the housing is, housing hell, and how he plans to get us as Canadians out of this. So it's not just Toronto, it's all of Canada. So without further ado, let's begin.
Something new and strange has happened in Canada.
Canada is sitting on probably one of the largest housing bubbles of all times.
Something we haven't seen before. An entire generation of youth now say they will never be able to afford a home. This is not normal for Canada.
We've got students who are living in their vehicles because they couldn't find a place to live.
Tens of thousands of Canadians could default, Moshe, on their mortgages. And are we looking at that kind of nightmare scenario?
After generations of affordable and stable Canadian home prices, it now takes 66% of the average monthly income to make payments on the average single-detached Canadian house.
Note, I will say that he said average detached home. So if most cases, from what I can tell, the condos are not there, but the average detached home has grown so much more relative to the average income. So that number is a little bit more skewed. Even in Toronto, we're about 50% or so. But it's still not great because, you're supposed to use 1/3 of it, where that number came from.
Given that most of the remaining 34% of the family paycheck is taken up by taxes, there's literally nothing left for food and recreation. And that all assumes that you have enough for a down payment to get the mortgage in the first place. Saving up for that down payment in Toronto now takes an average of 25 years.
Unless you have rich parents.
Not long ago, you paid off a mortgage in that time. So young people must rent, but rent has doubled in the last 8 years. Newlyweds now pay $1,000 per month to rent a single room in a townhouse that they share with two other couples. 35-year-olds live in their parents' basements. Rents are so high in Toronto that students live in homeless shelters. Others sleep in their cars or even under bridges just to afford to go to university. One grandmother posted signs on hydro poles trying to find a place to live. Middle-class people like nurses and carpenters now live in their vehicles. Tent cities are popping up in almost every major city and many small towns in Canada, mostly in places that never had them before. And because homeless shelters are overflowing with people, new refugees are now told to live on the streets and under bridges. Like all countries, we've always had problems. Throughout Canada's past, though, almost anyone who got a job could save up and buy a home by their mid-20s. When did all that change? About 8 years ago. It's crazy to think, but in a little under a decade, Canada's housing costs have basically doubled. The rent has doubled. Mortgage payments doubled. The needed down payment on an average home doubled. Double trouble. Think about that. Housing costs have gone up more since 2015 than they had in all the years before that combined. 8 years ago, the average one-bedroom rent was about $970. The average today, $1,871.
Put in Toronto terms, it's about $1,800 for a one-bedroom outside of condos. Condos in downtown are like $2,200, give or take, right now, plus.
The average needed down payment, about $23,000. Today, $51,000. 8 years ago,
that number is very likely with an insured mortgage, not a 20% down in Canada-wide, because the Canadian average price is about $600 something right now.
The average mortgage payment was about $1,400. Now, it's over $3,500. 8 years ago, payments on an average single detached home cost roughly 40% of median family income. Now, that number is 66%. meaning that paychecks have not caught up with the cost of housing. And we can't blame the rest of the world. Canada's housing costs have risen faster and higher than almost any other country on earth. Depending on how and when you measure it, Canada's housing costs are on average 45 to 75% higher than in the United States. In border towns, it's even more. Homes on the Canadian side are often 100% more expensive than their American counterparts. Look at this home in Niagara, Canada, versus this home in Niagara, New York. Only about a half an hour apart from one another. Vancouver is now the third and Toronto the 10th most unaffordable city on earth, worse than New York, London, England, and even Singapore, a wealthy island with 2,000 times more people per square kilometer than Canada. All these places have more money and people and less land, yet they are more affordable.
I agree with that 100%. The challenge is like 40% of the Canadian population lives very close to the US. And I think about that 40% lives south of Minnesota in US. So everyone's trying to gravitate towards the Sun Belt. So a lot of our land isn't really livable if you go further north than that, right?
UBS, a major global bank, now lists Toronto as having the riskiest.
I think this is last year's report. I think I remember making a video about this for 2023. Toronto's no longer number one. So this is 2022.
Housing bubble in the world, with Vancouver 6th. According to UBS, home prices in Toronto and Vancouver have gone from fair valued to overvalued to bubble risk.
So I'm pretty sure I'll talk about it more later in this video because I haven't seen this yet. But this is very much the, I would say, immigration challenge where we brought way too many people in too quickly and we don't build enough homes.
All in only 10 years. This 2-bedroom property in Toronto's Kensington neighborhood cost the same as a 20-bedroom castle situated on 5 acres of land in Scotland. This shouldn't be a problem in Canada based on our supply-demand dynamics. Think about it. With our massive geography, meaning lots of supply, and our small population,
Geography doesn't necessarily mean supply. Supply has to be built. Just because there's a lot of land doesn't mean there's a lot of homes there. I think we have the same challenge as Russia with like cold weather.
Meaning limited demand, housing should be cheap here in Canada. We have the most land per person of any G7 country. That includes much land close to big cities where people need to live to work. So why is it so expensive? Well, let's break it down. A mortgage payment has 2 parts. Interest and principal. Interest rates are set by the Bank of Canada, but heavily influenced by the federal government.
They're supposed to be independent of one another, but in the past it has not been, and it's clearly been a thing since post-pandemic.
You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
When the government borrows and spends, it bids up the goods we buy and the interest we pay. The Trudeau government has doubled Canada's debt, adding...
That is true. I saw that. It's actually kind of ridiculous. But one of the things you have to keep in mind around over here is the pandemic. Everybody sloshed out money. Could we have sloshed out less money? Absolutely. But at the moment, given what we knew about the pandemic, was it a good thing so that people would stay safe? Yeah. But looking back, was it a good idea? No. So I would give the Liberals a pass on that one because almost everyone else in the world did the same. But just maybe not to our extent.
More debt than all prime ministers combined. Our finance minister has conceded that this deficit spending pours fuel on the inflationary fire.
And I'm going to start with what we shouldn't do. I think it is very important not to make the problem worse. I am very mindful of the importance of not pouring fiscal fuel on the flames of inflation.
And then, a few weeks later, she poured $69 billion of new fuel on that fire.
Yeah, this is kind of funny because I think even Bank of Canada has started coming out saying that government spending has gone out of hand and has made inflation worse. It's a little bit weird, even though they're supposed to be independent. It's like Bank of Canada's, taking stab at, the Liberal government saying, hey, you guys are spending too much, even though the Liberal governments are telling them, hey, print more money.
Fire. For governments to run huge deficits or borrow money, they sell bonds to investors. In recent years, the Trudeau government's spending has exploded, and they've been borrowing more than lenders will lend. So the Bank of Canada has started creating the cash. The money supply has therefore grown 8 times faster than the economy over the last 3 years. More money bidding on fewer goods including fewer houses, equals higher prices. But the central bank doesn't just send a Brinks truck to the Prime Minister's office. Rather, they use a complicated set of transactions that they call quantitative easing. Always be suspicious when you hear a complicated word that makes no sense to anyone except those benefiting from it. Here's how it goes. First, the government sells bonds to financial institutions. Then, the Bank of Canada buys those bonds right back at higher prices. Financial corporations love it because they're guaranteed a big profit. But the consequence is not only that the government gets more easy money to spend, but the financial system overflows with cash, which often is lent out at ultra-low rates in super large mortgages, particularly for wealthy investors whose banking connections get them to the front of the line.
While that is true to some extent, the allowing of easy money by the commercial banks like your Big Five or Big Six, right, is one of the reasons why prices have gone up. But I wouldn't say it's the sole reason why, because a lot of people have access to that cheap money, not just big corporations.
So as you can see in this chart from the Bank of Canada itself, investors doubled the number of home purchases they made in just over a year.
That's also very, very true, because what happens is when you have your, call it risk-free return, which is usually the 5-year bond rate, being so low, when you put money in there and you return less than inflation, it means that your purchasing power is reduced. So what happened during the pandemic is when interest rates were pushed down to so low, for people to keep their purchasing power from, inflation, they basically put it into speculative things such as real estate or stocks or crypto or NFTs or whatever, right? So that's why there's a huge spike in it.
Here, the black line, well, it shows when the quantitative easing began.
Again, I wouldn't fully blame it on quantitative easing. It's because they dropped interest rates to basically make the economy go on the off chance it was going to blow up because of the pandemic. And like I said earlier, all the other countries also did that.
Cause? Money printing. Effect? Housing inflation. So the government deficits forced the Bank of Canada to boost interest rates to push inflation back down. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley put it this way.
It appears that fiscal and monetary policy are not aligned. And the importance of that alignment is key. We're still running very large fiscal deficits. The government still talks about how much they're going to continue to spend. And this is a bit like driving your car with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake.
Common sense.
The irony is the two were supposed to be talking to one another, but clearly they're not by his definition.
And solution, stop the inflationary deficits so the bank doesn't have to raise the rates. That means cutting government waste and capping government spending with a dollar-for-dollar law that forces politicians to find $1 of savings for each new dollar of spending. By getting back towards a balanced budget, we'll bring down inflation and interest rates on your mortgage payment. So that helps address the interest cost of the mortgage payment. What about the principal, which is determined by the home price? Canadian prices, which are so much higher than in other countries, are determined by supply and demand. We have the fewest houses per capita in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. We have fewer houses per capita today than we did 8 years ago, as population has outgrown home building. Canada.
So you can basically see in this little spread here, that's your supply-demand problem right now.
Today than we did 8 years ago, as population has outgrown home building.
And I'm just going to comment on this. It's been more upfront in the last few years since the pandemic, because we brought in a lot more people as a huge surge because we didn't bring anyone in. And the Liberals also increased immigration targets for Canadian residents, I think from 2017 onwards, right? But we had the structural supply-demand problem already. You can see it outlined over here. We weren't even building enough homes before we accounted for all the immigration that we're getting in after 2017. So that's why when we started bringing in more immigration or demand, it just made things that much worse.
Canada built fewer homes last year than it built in 1972, 50 years ago. Consider this. In 1972, Canada's population was 22 million, and we built about 230,000 homes. In 2022, Canada's population was 39 million, and we built about 220,000 homes.
This is a huge problem. I think I've outlined it many, many times before in my videos. It's not as easy to turn the faucet of building on and off. There's a lot of things I'm sure this video will probably get into, but one of the main things is we've already been building at max capacity. We essentially need more laborers, people who actually do the work. Because even if everything else is good, you don't have the people who build it. It's a big problem. And as I said in the past before, a lot of the blue collar trades who actually know how to do it are retiring soon because they're boomers. And a lot of like our generation doesn't want to, hands and hammer put together, right? So I think we're going to have a challenge with that.
In other words, far more people, far less home building. And the shortfall is only growing. Canada's housing agency, the CMHC, predicts a 32% drop in home building this year.
We're going to see a lag effect. So just because there aren't no starts right now, it probably, depending on like if it's freehold, we'll have less freehold in 2-3 years. We'll have a lot less condos in probably like 5 or 6.
As higher interest rates and red tape are blocking construction. The agency projects that we will be 3.5 million homes short by the year 2030, based on our current estimates of building and population growth. Where will those 3.5 million families live? More importantly,
it may be less than 3.5 million families, depending on what the immigration targets are.
Why can't we build homes to house them? What do you think is the most expensive thing that goes into a new house in, say, Vancouver? Is it labor? Lumber? Land? Nope. Government. A CD House study added up all the costs of labor, materials, land, and profit needed to build a home and compared it to the final sale price. In Vancouver, the gap was nearly $1.3 million. That gap, or as I call it, the gatekeeper gap, is the cost of government permit delays, changing rules, pricey consultants, lawyers' fees, charges, taxes.
Certain lawyer fees and charges aren't on the government, but sure, you can loop it in. These are soft costs.
Etc. Another study showed Montreal's city government blocked 24,000 homes. The city of Winnipeg, meanwhile, just lost a lawsuit because it tried to block the construction of nearly 2,000 homes right next to a newly built transit system. As an example of the mindless red tape costs, the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force report stated that, quote, minimum parking requirements add as much as $165,000 to the cost of...
Yeah, I remember reading this when we talked about it, like I think a year ago. With condos now, I think they've reduced the minimum parking requirements. That's why a lot of the downtown condo spaces don't actually have parking that come with the unit, because it's very expensive to go underground and you don't make your money back on the parking, at least on the builder side. And even on the investor side, it doesn't make sense because you have to pay maintenance on it, right? So it makes sense to not have the parking requirements, and that is changing.
A new home, even as demand for parking spaces is falling, and that one of the strongest signs that our approval process is not working. Of 35 OECD countries, only the Slovak Republic takes longer than Canada to approve a building project. The UK and US approve projects 3 times faster without sacrificing quality or safety. Government development charges in Ontario can be as much as $135,000 per home.
They've gone significantly worse after, I think, 2018. They just kept doubling and adding it on top. And the challenge with development charges is that they get passed on to the buyer. And usually, if it's an investor, it gets passed on to the person who ultimately buys it from the investor, like an end user. So that's probably how he's calculating this extra added tax on top. Realistically, you don't need to do it if you were, like, say, increasing property taxes, right? Which I think Toronto's doing now.
And some have increased as much as 900% in less than 20 years. And those charges don't include governmental costs like taxes, delays, and uncertainty. Worst of all, the Trudeau government has encouraged this gatekeeping with billions of dollars in new grants to the same city governments that block home building. He is literally funding the hiring of more gatekeepers to stand in the way of building.
While I think that could be true in some extent, I don't know if that's what the money is being spent for. At least when I last looked at the federal budget, they're using the money as an extra loan to offset some of the financing costs for builders for rental buildings, so that the numbers actually make a little bit more sense.
Homes. So you lose 2 ways. You pay more in taxes so that you can pay more for a home. So what if we incentivized good behavior rather than reinforcing the bad? Here's how we can. The federal government spends about $4.5 billion on direct and continuous municipal infrastructure transfers. Big city politicians care about getting that money more than anything else. They'll only permit more home building faster if their federal money depends on it.
What I will say on this is, while there's true, if you incentivize to reduce the permitting process, that doesn't necessarily mean that the builders who get the permits will build. There are many projects that I know in York region and in Toronto that have permits, but they're not building right now because maybe the numbers don't make sense, they're land banking, and maybe that thing prices are going to be higher. So just because you have a permit doesn't necessarily mean you have to build. Now, if they implement something where that, hey, the minute you get your permit, call it within a year, if you don't break ground, are you going to get penalized? Yeah, that may help. But I wouldn't say it's strictly the city's fault.
My common sense plan: 1. Require big cities to complete 15% more home building per year as a condition of getting federal infrastructure.
So I think the biggest challenge with that one right there, while I do agree it may move the needle a little bit, is the cities can't force the builders to build, like I was saying, right? Unless they force the losing of the permit after a certain period of time, right?
Structure money. 2. Give building bonuses to cities that exceed the 15% target. Dollars should be based on housing completions, not promises. 3.
I agree with that. It kind of ties into number one, but that probably helps by putting basically a carrot in front of all the cities. If you make more homes, you get more money, which is great.
3. Require federally funded transit stations be permitted for high-density apartments all around it, and with
That's already happening in Toronto and some of the other big cities. If that happens, then you reduce all the permitting for some of the bigger builders, which may be good, but one of the side effects is that it could make land around transit cities that much more expensive, that much faster, right? Which means the cost of land goes up, which offsets maybe the reduction of the delays. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but that's just a side effect. I think that may happen.
hold federal transit grants until the apartments are built and occupied. 4. Sell off 15% of federal buildings and thousands of acres of surplus federal land suitable for housing.
That last one is actually very good. We kind of see a lot of that happen in Toronto already, where they're converting all of the community housing and giving it to a builder to build, where they get the land for a little bit less. Some people get displaced temporarily, then they come back and you get a lot of mixed use, right? So you have that in Regent Park, and you have another one in Alexandra Park. So like Daniels and Tridal have been doing a lot of that stuff really, and I think they've been pretty big successes on that side. So if they sell off or give a discount to it, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Of federal buildings and thousands of acres of surplus federal vaults. It should link the number of federal dollars big city governments get for infrastructure to the number of new homes completed. Money should flow after the keys are indoors. Pay for promises, get more promises. Pay for results, get results. The good news is we have examples of success. Look at the Squamish Nation and their development in Vancouver. They've approved and begun building on 6,000 apartments and condos on just 10.4 acres of land. That's nearly 600 homes per acre. Now, they could do this because, being a reserve, they did not need to follow Vancouver City Hall rules. That means...
I'm curious to see if that density was not allowed by Vancouver rules, or that's just an example he's using. I don't know too much about it, but I would just fact check that.
6,000 hardworking local residents will get a place to live because there were no city gatekeepers standing in the way. But let's bring this back. This isn't just about the price of a home. It is not just about numbers. This is people's lives. If we don't fix this, we could have hundreds of thousands of middle-class people living on the street in Canada. A home is your financial future. A home is the place you're secure. A home is where you raise a family. A home is at the center of everything you do in your life. If the government stands in the way of you getting a home, it stands in the way of your entire life going forward.
While I agree with that, I wouldn't pin it all on the government getting in the way of your home. And I get what he's trying to do. Like, I would say I'm probably a little more left than right because as a business owner, but I wouldn't pin it all on the Liberal governments for causing all of this. A lot of this also has to do with like supply demand. And obviously I was saying you can't bring on that much supply if you don't have the laborers to actually build the thing, right? Even if you removed all the government out of the way.
Good news is housing costs were not like this before Justin Trudeau, and they won't be like this after he's gone. We can borrow less and build more. We have all the natural advantages: abundant land, labor, and lumber.
We have a lot of resources, natural resources, but the problem in Canada is we ship our natural resources to US to refine them. So we ship our wood to convert to lumber in the US, and US sells it back to us, and then we pay tariffs on that on top of paying a premium on getting the refinery. So I think from a supply side or like materials, that needs to be worked on, because we do have some of the best lands and resources in the world. The other thing really when it comes down to about like laborers, like I talked about earlier, we need more of them to come in, just because we have those two things, then we can actually build on more supply. But until those two things are there, removing government red tape will, move the needle a little bit, but it's not going to solve the problem, as the video is trying to point out.
The best carpenters, plumbers, framers, and electricians and home builders. We just need to get the gatekeepers out of their way and yours so that we can bring it home.
Yeah, I think the video overall is really well done. It's kind of bringing a lot of points out that maybe some people haven't fully thought about, and it does explain it very easily. And obviously, because this is meant to attack the Liberal government, I think it's a little bit too skewed in a negative way, saying that the Liberals caused everything. Yes, they're at fault for a lot of things, let's call it that, but I wouldn't say, it's totally their fault. Because even if you remove the red tape out of here, and let's just say, the Liberals are gone, the Conservatives are in power, they remove the red tape. The problem I still personally see for prices to come down is threefold, right? Your first one is we need to reduce immigration. We just can't support the infrastructure. Like the video said, we're like 10 years behind on building already. And I don't know at what point, what that number is right for us to actually reduce it to, like the number of immigrants. I don't know, but we need to reduce the number that comes in. Number two is that, yes, we may have the ability to remove the red tape, but again, you don't have the supply, like the resources that come in at a good price for deflationary effects to make the things cheaper. And second, we still have way too little people to actually build these things, right? So if there's too little supply on the labor side, that means they can charge a higher price, like unionize and everything. So we need to bring in more supply of blue collar workers, which may be through immigration, but then again, that increases the immigration number, right? So again, 1 and 2 tie together. And then thirdly, if prices were to come down and get a reduction, I don't know what's going to happen to the banks, right? Because the banks essentially are holding on most of these loans. And if they're underwater, what are they going to do about it? They're already making a big fuss about negative amortization right now. What happens if every single house is dropped 20% in price, right? So I don't know how that's going to play out. I would suspect the best way to kind of navigate this is you basically try to keep prices flat as much as possible, so the people who actually own homes aren't totally underwater, the banks aren't underwater, and you would let incomes try to catch up so that the affordability gap gets better. And then when you reduce interest rates, if there's no inflation, then yeah, the affordability could be better. Because even if prices say on average in Toronto are $2 million, if your income doubles to, like your average income doubles to about $120,000 and your rates are at 2 or 3%, it's a lot more affordable than what it is right now, where the rates are at 6.5, your income to your home is about 10x spread. So if you reduce that spread, then yeah, affordability will get better. How they plan to do that, I don't know, TBD, right? We'll see what their voting platform is. But overall, I say video, well made, highlights a couple problems. I wouldn't totally blame it on the Liberals. They're totally at fault for some things, but not at fault for everything. Hopefully you like this new format I'm putting. Let me know in the comment section below. And if you are looking for some help on how to navigate the real estate market in the upcoming 2024 year, you can book a call with me using the link that's right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Now that I'm done watching this video, I think you should check out this video. And you know what? Why don't you check out this video too?